Hello students, welcome to our um, week 2 lesson 3 tutorial video where we're going to be focused on practicing a monologue, and based upon what you have learned in the slideshow before you came to this tutorial video. Within this monologue we want to incorporate or have it reflect the learning that we've been doing on the concept of voice and patterns of language use. We also want our monologue that we write together to reflect the language features and structure of an internal monologue that we have learned last term and practiced before as well. So we're going to be bringing that all together to construct an internal monologue from the perspective of the character Jeffrey Liu. So that's the activity that we're about to do there together, and the purpose of that, okay, is to build your understanding of how to apply the voice of a character in a monologue, and also to use those language features and structures of the text type. So we're going to jointly start a monologue from Jeffrey's perspective together, and once we're about 250 words in or thereabouts, you are going to continue on with that monologue on your own, and you are going to write the rest of it on your own, and then you're going to email it to me. Remember that you need to write at least another 200 words from the ending point. Okay, so the purpose of this video is to model to you the thinking processes, the thought processes, as you're writing a monologue, so that you can see those in action, and you can see how the language features and structure are incorporated into an internal monologue. So that is what we're going to be doing in this tutorial video. Okay, so I want you to have your workbook in front of you. I'm going to type up the internal monologue that we're doing together here on the screen. I'll use the highlighter and I'll add in comments as well. And whilst I'm doing that, okay, you need to be writing down what I put here on the screen into your workbook as well, and writing the notes and doing the highlighting that I do here on the screen as well. Okay, so now that we're organized, let's go to our starting point for this monologue. So have a look here on the screen. The monologue that we're going to jointly write will be from Jeffrey's perspective. So we've already established that. Now, very importantly, the monologue is going to be written in past tense, because Jeffrey will be reflecting upon his experience during his afternoon in the cricket nets with Charlie. So we've read it to the end of chapter 2. In fact, you should have read up to the end of chapter 3 by today's lesson. That was a homework task or an extra work task that was set for you. All work is done at home at the moment. And that's the point that we're going to be reflecting upon, or the plot event that we're going to be reflecting upon. Now, the starting point for the reflection from Jeffrey's perspective is on page 89. So Jeffrey skips home. Remember, this is written from Charlie's perspective, okay, because he's the narrator of the text. We're going to be writing our monologue from Jeffrey's perspective. Jeffrey skips home. As he arrives, Arn stands abruptly and jabs his secateurs in his direction, yelling something stern and fierce. Arn, of course, being Jeffrey's father. Jeffrey stands bolt still, looks like he's in the shit. I watch him duck his head and mooch inside. I do the same. Okay, so we're going to be writing a monologue from that point in time where Jeffrey is going to be reflecting back upon his afternoon in the cricket nets with Charlie. So because it is reflective, meaning he is looking back on an event, a plot event that has happened, it will be written primarily in past tense. Okay, so that is our starting point. We're writing from Jeffrey's perspective from this point in the plot, and it is going to be written in past tense as he reflects back upon his afternoon in the cricket nets with Charlie. Okay, so let's switch over to our Word document. Here we go. Okay, so I might just make that a little bit larger. Okay. Dad's angry with me again. but when is he not? Okay, so that's our first sentence. Okay, Jeffrey's just walked inside after his father has yelled at him, and he's posing here a rhetorical question. So Dad's angry with me again, but when is he not? So he's having that internal conversation with himself. So I'll just adjust that. He has high expectations and believes my time could be better invested with my head buried in books rather than loitering at the cricket nets. Yes, even in the middle of the summer holidays. Okay, so Dad's angry with me again, but when is he not? He has high expectations. So his father has high expectations of him, okay, and what he does and how he spends his time. He believes my time could be better invested with my head buried in books. So that there, okay, that is a metaphor, isn't it? Okay, so he's not literally burying his head in books, okay, but it's a metaphor to describe the act of reading or the act of studying, rather than loitering at the cricket nets. Yes, even in the middle of the summer holidays. Now, when you did your analysis of Jeffrey's voice and his patterns of language use, I'm sure that you would have identified that he has quite a wide vocabulary and also a sophisticated use of words and terminology. And that certainly does reflect his social and cultural background and the fact that he seems to be very well educated. So our internal monologue from his perspective needs to reflect that. It needs to reflect that wide choice of or wide use of vocabulary that he has. So I've used the word loitering, pretty sophisticated term like better invested, and also, some of those more common cliches or terms that we use quite often, high expectations, for example. Okay, so he's just reflected there upon that incident that he's had with his dad where he's yelled at him, and the gap that we've filled here is that his father is angry that he spent his day playing cricket instead of doing something more productive with his time. But I'm willing to risk Dad's wrath. Colin, I need to play cricket in the same way that I need to eat, sleep, and be a smart ass to Charlie. It's absolutely necessary. Okay, but I'm willing to risk Dad's wrath. I need to play cricket in the same way that I need to sleep, eat, and be a smart ass to Charlie. Okay, so that's all a bit of hyperbole, isn't it? Okay, but you would have noticed when you analysed Jeffrey's voice and his pattern of language use, he does use a pretty wide range of profanity. And in fact, there's a fairly funny segment of dialogue between him and his mum where he's swearing and she doesn't know what swear words are because she's an English second language user. And in the conversation on dialogue between Charlie and Jeffrey, they frequently use profanity. And Jeffrey has an extremely sarcastic tone to a lot of his language use. So this little clause here, I'm trying to reflect that sarcasm, that sarcastic tone that he has, and also a little bit of that use of profanity as well. Okay, I live and breathe this sport, so that's another bit of hyperbole and also a metaphor to say that he cares about it a lot. He's talking about how much cricket means to him. when I'm not trawling through the data, tracking the change in Laurie's batting average, or the difference between Benno and Mackenzie's strike rate. I'm forensically sifting through the paper to find the results from the most obscure local competitions around the state. Alright, so there's a lot there, and if you need to pause in order to be able to copy that down, please do so. Okay, so go through this tutorial video at your own pace. Okay, but he's reflecting upon here how important the sport of cricket is to him. And as we saw in chapter 2, he's willing to put up with a lot, including physical and verbal bullying and abuse, in order to be able to do his cricket practice. So he's reflecting here about how much this sport means to him. So let's discuss the language features, okay, and the content of what I've just written. So when I'm not trawling through the data, tracking the change in Laurie's batting average, or the difference between Benno and Mackenzie's strike rate. So trawling through, okay, that's a metaphor. Through the data, tracking the change in Laurie's batting average. Okay, so there's some very specific cricket terminology here. Okay, and that is reflective of his voice, because he's an individual that is obsessed with cricket, and because of that, in this internal monologue, we need to reflect that register of language. What I mean by register is his ability to use very subject-specific vocabulary related to the subject of cricket. Okay, so batting average, that's a very specific term related to, scoring in cricket and statistics in cricket. I've also got here an allusion to a famous Australian cricketer from the time period in which the novel is set, and that is Bill Lawry, who was a player at that time. And then I've got another allusion here, the difference between Benno and Mackenzie. So they were two bowlers from that time. Strike rate. The strike rate is another very specific cricketing term, and it is the number of balls bowled between a wicket for a bowler. Okay, so in that little passage there, some very specific cricket terminology and register that is reflecting his obsession with the sport, and also a couple of allusions to cricket players from that time period in which the novel is set. I'm forensically sifting through, so forensically again reflecting his wide vocabulary, the paper to find the results from the most obscure local competitions around the state. So he's reflecting upon how important this game is to him and what he's willing to put up with, including his father's anger and the bullying from the local cricket team, in order to be able to practice his obsession. For anyone who doesn't have a burning session for a hobby like I do, I'm aware that my behaviour would appear manic and as a foolish expenditure of a finite life. So he's talked about, how much he lives and breathes cricket and how much of his time it takes up. Then he says, for anyone who doesn't have a burning obsession for a hobby like I do, so he has a real strong obsession with cricket. I'm aware that my behaviour would appear manic and as a foolish expenditure of a finite life. So he's smart. He has a very wide vocabulary, and he also has a very clever ability to string words together. And because of that, his patterns of language use need to reflect it in this monologue. So, burning, that's the use of a high modality adjective, and it's metaphorical as well. And manic, okay, so that is a term that means someone who's, a little bit crazy and potentially, hyper energetic about what they're doing, and a foolish expenditure of a finite life. And finite meaning obviously limited. Okay, we have a limited amount of time in this world. Alright, next sentence. God knows. My parents are certainly in that camp, meaning that they view it as manic and foolish. That's a metaphor. Alright. Certainly in that camp, whenever I try to make the casual equivalence to my parents between my passion for the willow and leather and my dad's for the rake and secateurs, there is usually only a half hyperbolic threat. M dash uttered Vietnamese unintelligible. Use the latter to relieve me of any number of bodily appendages. Okay, so let's go through this and pause it if you need to catch up with the writing. Okay, so he says here that his parents view, his obsession with cricket as being foolish and manic. Now, here's what he says. Whenever I try to make the casual equivalence to my parents between my passion for the willow and leather, okay, so he says he's trying to make an equivalence or say that two things are equal. Okay, in this case, his passion for the willow and leather. And willow and leather, that is what's called a metonym. Okay, so a metonym is when, how can I explain this? When a word is used to stand in for something related to it. So I'll give you an example of this. For example, people might say, refer to Canberra, the capital city. And by saying Canberra, then what they're actually referring to is the centre of Australia's government or Australia's government. So, for example, someone might put into a sentence, Canberra reacted swiftly to the crisis by spending a lot of money to try and fix it. So in that sentence, Canberra refers to the Australian government. Okay, to give you another example of it, over in the US, people often refer to the White House. And the White House is a stand-in for the US president and the US president's administration. So, for example, a reporter might say the White House is going to make a statement very soon about the unfolding crisis. And by the White House is going to make a statement, it refers to the president and his administration is going to make a statement about it. So in this case, the metonym is willow and leather, which is a term that is standing in for cricket overall, his passion for cricket. Okay, and then there's another metonym here, which is my dad's for the rake and secateurs. Okay, so the rake and secateurs is an object that is standing in for the hobby or practice of gardening. Now, this metonym here, willow and leather, why that stands in for, the sport of cricket in its entirety is because it's related. The willow is the type of wood that cricket bats are typically made of, and leather is what cricket balls are made of. Rake and secateurs, two instruments or tools that are used in the practice or hobby of gardening. So he's saying there he tries to make the equivalent sometimes of his parents between his love for cricket and his dad's love for gardening. And when he does that, there's usually only a half hyperbolic, meaning half serious, threat, uttered in Vietnamese, so it is unintelligible, meaning that the neighbours can't hear it. To use a ladder, meaning the secateurs, to relieve me of any number of my bodily appendages. So relieve me of, meaning to cut off, his fingers or his toes or something like that, if he says that. Okay, so he's reflecting there upon his relationship with his parents and how his parents are very strict disciplinarians. And when he tries to make a comparison between how much he loves cricket and how much his father loves gardening, his parents do not respond to that very well, and they might make only a half joking threat to very seriously physically punish him for making that equivalence. Okay, next paragraph. But I will not be deterred. Believe it or not, my parents are only a minor obstacle to my union with the game I love. The local cricket team take kindly to sharing their nets with the local Kong. Kid. Okay. So I'll not be deterred, meaning that he's not going to be put off. He loves the game and he doesn't care what his parents have to say to it. And then he says, believe it or not, my parents are only a minor obstacle to my union with the game I love. Okay, so there's a metaphor. Okay, so his union, like his marriage to the game he loves, his connection with the game he loves. The local cricket team don't take kindly to sharing their nets with the local Kid. And that was a term that was used in chapter 2. During the part of the plot where he and Charlie are down at the cricket nets and the local cricket team is also there, and they brutally bully Jeffrey while he is practicing his bowling. And despite their bullying, their physical abuse and their verbal and racial abuse, he continues to do that. So his parents are only a minor obstacle to him being able to play the game that he loves. The local cricket players, they are a more significant obstacle that he needs to do it. So why does he put up with it? We're starting to get some understanding because he loves the game that much. Their beatings, their bullying. I've got the comma there. Merciless. Charlie thinks I need my head red for putting up with it. After all, I don't have to. It's entirely voluntary. Submission to torture. So, do I do it? Okay. Their beatings, their bullying, I'm merciless. Charlie thinks I need my head read. Okay, so that's a metaphor. And it's sort of a colloquial metaphor. It's one that we use here in Australia a lot. For putting up with it. After all, I don't have to. It's an entirely voluntary submission to torture. Okay, so there's some pretty sophisticated language use that reflects the wide vocabulary that he has in his patterns of language use as a character. All right, so why do I do it? ... ellipsis. So this is where you need to start to write. Why does he do it? Why does he continue to put up with it? We know that he loves the game, but what is it about his personality that does not deter him from going down to those nets and putting up with that awful bullying that he is subjected to? Why does he continue to put up with it? And why does he not, I suppose, try to do something about it to make it stop? And why does he not find another way around it instead of having to subject himself to it? So what is it about his personality that compels him or drives him to continue to do that? That's what you need. That's the gap and silence that you need to fill in now. Continuing to write in Jeffrey's voice using those language features that you have learned. So continue to write it on Microsoft Word, okay, and then email to me the completed monologue that you have written with an extra 200 words minimum. If you want to write more than that, by all means, please do. I'd be interested to see what you write. And then I can give you some feedback on it to see how well you have adopted his voice as a character, and to also give you some feedback on how well you have implemented those language features of the internal monologue text type. Alright, so I think that's where we can leave our video. Thank you for listening to it. And hopefully that's helped build your understanding of how voice, character voice, and those language features work in practice. Alright, speak to you guys again very soon.